Okay. The second question is, the secretary and you often say that Israel has the right to defend itself, but how it does it, it matters. So this morning, there were 6 first responders were killed in Lebanon, civilians. In Gaza, it's over 40,000, 70% are women and children. In Lebanon, is 1 million people are homeless. So when he says how it matters, if there's no consequences in Israel, doesn't his word carry no weight? Does it mean that is really a statement for public consumption?
Absolutely not.
Why?
Absolutely not. Look, wars have horrific consequences. They always have. They always will. And these wars have had horrific consequences for the people of Gaza and now for the people of Lebanon. It is why the U.S. has worked so hard to try to reach a diplomatic resolution to the conflict in Lebanon. And what you saw going back months is Hezbollah refusing to stop its attacks on civilian targets inside Israel. It's why we've tried to reach a ceasefire agreement in Gaza that would ultimately lead to the guns being silenced, hostages coming home, humanitarian assistance surging in. We will continue to pursue both of those things. But in each of these cases, it is just a little more complicated than the question concedes. It is more complicated when you have terrorist groups that hide inside civilians. When you look at the death of Hassan Nasrallah last week, where was he? Was he on a military compound? Was he on a compound that Hezbollah built where there were only members of Hezbollah? No, he was underneath a civilian apartment building. And when you look at what has happened over and over again in Gaza, you've seen Hamas hiding not just in apartment buildings, but mosques and schools. Now, we've been very clear with Israel that doesn't lessen their obligation to do everything possible to be mindful, to minimize and reduce and eliminate civilian casualties, but it's an extremely tough situation. It's every military in the world would face extremely challenging circumstances trying to take on a terrorist organization that was committed to targeting civilians, not just targeting members of the military, but targeting civilians. And at the same time, they do it hiding among civilians. That's what makes the situation so difficult.
And just finally, do you see this current escalation and a military conflict as a result of U.S. failed diplomacy, or is it Netanyahu's government trying to drag the U.S. into a bigger war?
So again, it's a little bit of a simplistic question about a complicated situation. There are 2 parties to this conflict.
I don't know, it's a simplistic question.
Israel is one party to this conflict, and Hezbollah is the other party to this conflict. When you look at the conflict in the north, it's a conflict that Hezbollah started on October 8th, that they could have ended any day since then. It's not a conflict that Israel started. It's a conflict that Hezbollah started, that they could have stopped by stopping firing rockets. So I will say, as I said in response to an earlier question, we've been at similar situations over the past 12 months where situations were incredibly high and it looked like we might get into a full-scale war. And the combination of our deterrence and diplomacy and the hard work, not just of the United States, but our allies and partners in the region has been successful in preventing that from happening, which is never a prediction of future success. But to us, it tells us that we ought to stay at it and keep working and stay at the diplomacy and the deterrence, work with our partners, and that's what we are going to continue to do. Yeah, go ahead, and then I'll come.
One very specific one. Because you have been talking about, you've been asked about 1 year on, you talked about how one of the challenges that the US faced was to help get more aid in. Reuters has been reporting that sources who work in aid delivery say that Israel has introduced this new customs rule that makes individuals who are delivering aid now have to sign forms to say that they, to accept liability for false information. And then there's lots of individuals working on delivering aid who don't want to sign it because they fear they could be legally liable if any of that aid falls into Hamas's hands. And as we know, aid has fallen into Hamas's hands. It has apparently had a knock-on effect and is reducing the amount of aid that's being delivered, particularly in the last 2 weeks and particularly via the route from Jordan. Do you have any comment on that? Are you aware of that impact?
I'm not going to comment on that specific report other than to say that our Special Envoy for Humanitarian Issues, Lise Grande, has been working on a number of potential obstacles to the delivery of humanitarian assistance, including intensely over the past week, 10 days, including some new measures that we've had to respond to and that we have been working on. And I will just, and it's not just Lise, it's others from the State Department across the government who've been working on those. I will just make clear, Israel has an obligation under international humanitarian law to ensure that humanitarian assistance makes it to the people in Gaza, to ensure that there are not unnecessary barriers to the delivery of humanitarian assistance. That is their obligation. It's not the United States telling them that. It's their obligation under international humanitarian law, and we expect them to comply with that obligation.
Thank you.
Go ahead. I promised I'd call on to him. I'll come to you next. Go ahead.
But just before I start my questions, I have a follow-up on Michelle and Said's question regarding the oil facilities and nuclear facilities in Iran. Do you consider them legitimate targets? Because they are civilians' infrastructure, isn't it?
Look, I just don't think it's productive for me or appropriate at this point to talk about our ongoing discussions with the government of Israel. It's clear that this was an unprecedented escalation by Iran. Israel has the right to respond to it. We're going to have discussions. We're having discussions about what that response will look like. And at this point, I don't think I should talk about those.
And the reason why we ask about it, because it's not just Senator Graham who mentioned that. Reports in Israel saying that the retaliation will be in a couple of days and it will target oil facilities.
Look, we're obviously not responsible for the comments of members of Congress. It's an independent branch, and they say all sorts. Various members say all sorts of things, and I'm certainly not going to speak to reports, anonymous reports that may or may not be accurate. We're having conversations with them about the nature of their response, and I really think it is most productive for a variety of interests that we keep those conversations private.
All right, I want to talk about the ground incursion, the Israeli ground incursion in Lebanon. When it started, or hours before it started, it was reported that it was an understanding between the United States and Israel to keep it limited and targeted toward positions of Hezbollah in the south. But now, after 48 hours, the IDF is taking casualties. Missiles from Hezbollah still flying over to inside Israel. Does this risk that this limited incursion turns into a full-blown invasion to southern Lebanon?
Look, there has always been the risk, even before. Even before these limited incursions began, there's always been the risk of a full-blown war between Israel and Hezbollah, and it's something that we have been engaged with for some time. So, and if you look at history, the history of Israeli invasions of Lebanon and how those have rolled out, and how Israel has occupied Lebanese territory for extended period of time. Everyone here is well aware of the history of this region, and it is why we are continuing to work ultimately to pursue a diplomatic resolution to this. I don't want to try and predict what the future's going to bring, because it's impossible for anyone to do that, let alone me. I'll tell you what we're trying to pursue.
My final question. I received a text yesterday from a friend of mine from the other part of the world. She was in shock that for her it seems that the United States is so weak and helpless in influencing Netanyahu. I know that I asked similar question about it yesterday, and your answer was that they are sovereign, they take their own decisions, but you are involved in that area militarily as well. You defend them, you shot down missiles that directed at them, but you don't seem to influence them even to your interest. And a lot of people in the area, in the region there, lost faith, and there are a lot of talks about that you're not actually trying to, you're just complicit, and all that you talk about de-escalation and a humanitarian situation and all that is just a smoke to allow Israel and enable it to do whatever it wants.
Well, I obviously don't agree. And I will say, when it comes to the answer that I gave about them being a sovereign country, it's not my answer, it's reality. It's a fact. Israel's a sovereign country. Every other country in the region is a sovereign country. There is no country in the world that the U.S. dictates to how they conduct their security policy, how they conduct their foreign policy. We present what we believe are in the best interests of the United States, what we believe at times are in Israel's interests, what we believe are in the interests of other countries in the region. But as I said, ultimately Israel has to make its own decisions, and they have to bear the consequences of those decisions for good and for bad. And there have been a number of decisions they have taken we have agreed with. There have been a number of decisions they have taken that we disagree with. And we have very clear conversations about them, but it's just not that simple that any country in the world, I shouldn't say any country, but the countries in the world take their direction from other countries. We don't have that type of relationship with Israel. We don't have it with other countries. We don't expect any country in the world to do exactly what the United States thinks is in their best interest. All we can do is make clear what we think is the right path forward and what we think are the risks, and there are real risks of pursuing alternative paths. It's independent sovereign countries get to make their own choices, and as I said, they have to live with the consequences of them. Yeah, go ahead.
Just wanted to follow up on some of the questions on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. Do you believe that Israel is doing everything it can to allow sufficient aid into Gaza?
I think we have seen for some time various obstacles to the delivery of humanitarian assistance. Sometimes those have been bureaucratic obstacles where one arm of the Israeli government or of the security services isn't talking to another arm. And we've tried to work through those. At times we've seen security hurdles that we don't agree with. So provisions that Israel puts in place that are supposedly to improve security inside Gaza that we actually don't think will have that effect and that we think are counterproductive. And we engaged with them to try and get those measures reversed or in some cases modified. Sometimes Israel has very real concerns about smuggling or they have concerns about diversion. And we work with them to try to make sure those concerns are addressed, but in a way that doesn't keep humanitarian assistance from coming out.
And do you have any
update
on the number of trucks entering Gaza and Israel?
I don't. I know the UN makes that number available every day. I don't have it at my fingertips here. Yeah.
Thank you, Matt. Since the killing of Hassan Nasrallah, the mood in Iraq is the mood of anger and mourning. So soon after the attack yesterday, the Iraqi resistance group, they issued a statement and said if the U.S. get involved into this conflict, so all American facilities and interests in the region will be a target for us. And how do you view this, and what response do you have for this resistance group in Iraq?
So we have made very clear a couple things. Number one, that no entity in the region should use this moment to target American interests, and that we will defend American interests and American personnel in the region. And have also made clear that the forces that are in Iraq are there at the invitation of the government of Iraq, and it is the government of Iraq that must bear the first line of responsibility in holding any entity that seeks to target U.S. forces accountable for those actions.
And some Iranian-backed elements in Iraq get involved into this conflict. They joined the Houthis and the Hezbollah in attacking Israel. So there's a big fear in Iraq and in the region that Iraq might be the next destination of this conflict. Do you have the same fear, and what will the U.S. do in preventing the expansion of this conflict into Iraq?
Well, so we are going to continue to pursue diplomacy and deterrence to try and keep it from expanding. But I would say we, of course, have been concerned for some time about the various proxy groups that Iran funds, arms, and controls throughout the region. That includes in Iraq. The Iranian proxy groups inside Iraq that play a major destabilizing force inside that country. And so we will continue to defend our interests there, and we will continue to work to try to lower tensions. But of course, we're concerned about the role that proxy groups play inside Iraq.
So, two really brief things. I
Yeah.
can't remember Camilla's question about an American being killed. Was that in the West Bank or in Lebanon?
In Lebanon.
Okay, and it's an LPR.
It's an LPR,
answer,
legal.
Not
yeah,
an American.
Not an American citizen.
That's the only one that you're aware of, right?
Correct.
Okay, and then secondly, just on the whole PNG and Guterres thing, you said that you didn't think this was helpful in any way. Well, why? Are you aware that the Secretary General wanted to visit Israel?
so-
Do you know when the last time a Secretary General visited Israel?
So I am not aware of any upcoming travel by the Secretary General to Israel, but in any event, even aside from the question of travel, it's just not, I think, a productive step for
Okay.
Israel
Well, what
to
about
be
the
engaging in
Russians
that kind of
banning
activity.
people like you from ever entering? Is that not productive? I mean, you have no intention to go there. Was there? So I can imagine that you would say, well, this is pointless. Oh, too bad. I'm not going to be able to go to Sochi on my next vacation. But obviously, this is a little bit different.
Yeah.
Do you think that this decision by the Israeli foreign minister is going to make any difference in, negative difference in the diplomacy that's going on?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably not.
So then why? I don't understand why. Why do you even care?
Because one of the things that we have made clear for some time is that Israel has to think about a number of things as it handles its relations with the world, as it handles these conflicts. One, of course, is its security situation. Another really important one is its standing in the world. And steps like these just aren't productive and not helpful to improving Israel's standing in the world.
Okay. You might recall that in 1973, a former UN Secretary General named Kurt Waldheim did visit Israel. And you remember what his history was, right?
So I do remember his history. I can't say I recall that specific incident. I wasn't alive yet.
Well,
Didn't miss it by a
well,
lot.
he did, but the Israelis let him in and whatever.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Can I just follow up just on
Sure.
one point on that very briefly, but just to ask if you're aware, because Philippe Lazzarini of UNRWA, and I asked him about this at UNGA, United Nations General Assembly, about visas for lots of UN workers in Israel. And he talks about a lot of restrictions, not just UNRWA, but other UN agencies. People are really, having limits put on visas, some not being able to get in, a month or 2 months at a time, which appears to be having quite a big impact. I mean, are you guys aware of that? Are you saying anything?
Yeah, it has been an issue for some time, and on a number of occasions we have intervened with the government of Israel to get visas approved so humanitarian workers could make it into Israel and ultimately to visit Gaza. It has been at times a problem, and we have intervened directly to make clear that humanitarian workers need to be allowed in to do their job and have seen their visas approved. That's not to say in every case they've had visas approved, but in a number of cases we have seen that happen. Yeah.